She was reading when the world ate her. Not metaphorically, not in the slow, grinding way that bad assignments and bad commanders tend to devour people. Kale Marin was sitting in her bunk on the Helix station with a cracked paperback propped on her knee, something her mother had sent her 8 months ago with a note tucked inside that said read something that isn't a tactical manual for once. And then the floor shook, and then the walls turned sideways, and then the ceiling was somewhere she couldn't locate, and then there was nothing but a column of white light that smelled like burnt copper and static, pulling her upward with the patience and indifference of a god that didn't know her name. She did not scream. This is important. She had 17 seconds in that column of light, and she spent them the way she spent most emergencies, cataloging what she could see, what she couldn't, and what was likely to kill her first. The light ended. She hit a floor she didn't expect, tiled, warm, slightly sticky, and rolled without thinking, came up into a crouch, and found herself staring at a room that was not any room she had ever been trained to operate in. It was large. The ceiling was higher than it had any right to be, curved like the inside of a ribcage. The walls were the color of old bruises, deep violet shading to black at the edges, and they pulsed softly, as though the building itself was breathing. The floor tiles were dark and hexagonal and warm beneath her palms. There were objects on shelves that she couldn't name. There was light coming from no visible source. There was a smell like sulfur and something sweeter underneath it, like fruit left too long in the sun. There were also 3 beings standing 6 feet away, staring at her with the flat, predatory patience of animals that have never had reason to be afraid of anything. They were tall, that was the first thing. The shortest of the 3 stood at least 7 feet, and that was being generous. They were bipedal, broadly humanoid in outline, but the similarities ended there. Their skin, if it was skin, was the matte gray of old graphite, faintly ridged along the jaw and brow. Their eyes were amber, wide, without visible pupils, the color of firelight caught in still water. They wore armor that looked like it had been grown rather than manufactured, dark overlapping plates that shifted as they breathed, the seams between plates faintly luminescent. They each had 4 fingers. They each had a weapon at their hip that Kale couldn't identify but filed immediately as probably lethal. They were the Vorkai. She knew this the way you know things that have been briefed into you so many times that the knowledge becomes reflexive. The Vorkai were the apex predator of the Keth expanse, a warrior civilization that had never in recorded history asked for something they could simply take. They were, according to the last intelligence briefing she'd attended, currently in a state of hostile non-engagement with the Interstellar Coalition, which was the diplomatic way of saying that if a Vorkai ever actually met a human in person, the expected outcome was not a handshake. Kale stood up slowly. She showed her hands. She did not look away. The largest of the 3, a female, Kale realized, noting the broader shoulder ridge and the triple marking along the throat that intelligence had identified as the female designation, took 1 step forward. She tilted her head. She made a sound deep in her chest like gravel shifting in a drum. Then she did something Kale did not expect. She laughed. It wasn't a human laugh. It was shorter, sharper, more percussive, a sound like a blade striking a whetstone. But it was unmistakably amusement. The other 2 flanking her exchanged a glance. The large one spoke. Her voice was low and resonant, with a cadence that had nothing in common with human speech patterns, but Kale's neural translator, the chip implanted behind her left ear that she sometimes forgot existed, stuttered to life and began its work. A human, the Vorkai said, a single, small, soft human, delivered to us from the transit beam. A pause. The universe has a sense of humor today. Apparently, Kale said, because she had learned early in her career that silence is often interpreted as weakness, and she was not interested in being interpreted as weak. The translator rendered her words back in the Vorkai tongue. All 3 of them went still. The large one's amber eyes narrowed. She took another step forward. Up close she smelled like iron and something faintly mineral, like rain on hot stone. "You speak without being addressed," the Volkai said. "That is either very brave or very stupid." "My commanding officer would have said stupid," Kale said. "He said most things I did were stupid." Another pause. Then the smaller of the two flanking warriors made a sound, not a laugh this time, but something adjacent to it, more like recognition. "What is your designation, small thing?" "Kale Marin, Staff Sergeant, 2nd Recon Division, Helix Station." She let a beat pass. "Formerly of Helix Station, I suppose." "Given current circumstances." The large Volkai female, Kale, would learn later that her name was Vressa, that she held the rank of Pack Third, which was not the highest rank but was the rank that did most of the actual work, studied her for a long time. The amber eyes moved across her like hands checking a blade for cracks. "You are not afraid," Vressa said. "It was not a question." "I'm afraid," Kale said. "I'm just not showing it." This time the silence lasted longer. Vressa turned to the two warriors behind her and spoke too quickly for the translator to fully track, fragments only. Something about the transit anomaly, something about the High Commander, something about a word Kale's chip rendered as either curiosity or opportunity. Then Vressa looked back at her. "You will come with us," she said, "not as prisoner, as," she paused as if searching for the right category, "as interesting." Kale decided that interesting was probably better than the available alternatives. She went. The Volkai homeworld was called Veth, and it was beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they evolved without any consideration for human comfort. The sky was deep amber, shading to red at the horizon, lit by a sun that ran smaller and hotter than Earth's. The architecture was all vertical towers like stone teeth, bridges between them, no apparent ground-level streets because the Volkai didn't prefer ground level. They liked height. They liked the vantage. They liked to see things coming. Kale spent the first 3 days in a room that was almost a cell, not locked, but clearly designated, with a single high window that showed her a slice of amber sky and the occasional silhouette of a Volkai warrior crossing a bridge above. Food appeared. Dense, dark, nutrient-rich, utterly unlike anything she'd eaten before. She ate it anyway. She exercised in the small space because she did not know what was coming and she intended to be ready for it. On the 4th day, Vressa came back. She brought 2 things. A datapad with translation files loaded onto it, fuller vocabulary, syntax guides, cultural notation that the neural chip could use to dramatically improve its accuracy, and news. "There is a situation," Vressa said, settling onto the low bench across from Kale with the fluid ease of something born to its own weight. "You should know what it is." "I'd appreciate that," Kale said. Vressa's expression, which Kale was starting to learn to read, though she still misread it often, shifted into something she was filing under complex. "The transit beam that brought you here was not a mistake. It was activated. Someone wanted something pulled from your station. What arrived instead was you." Kale sat with that for a moment. What were they trying to pull? "A weapon," Vressa said. "Experimental, coalition designed. The kind that doesn't ask permission before it ends worlds." She paused. "Our High Commander Gareth has been pursuing this technology for 2 seasons. He believes it will end the Juvak threat once and for all." The Juvak. Kale's briefings had been vague on this. The coalition's intelligence on internal Volkai politics was limited at best. She knew the name. A rival faction, older than the current Volkai hierarchy, philosophically opposed to the pack structure that Gareth's line had built over 3 centuries. "I need to tell you something," Kale said carefully, "about your High Commander." Vressa's eyes shifted. "Speak." "The transit beam, when it activated on our end, something happened. There was a feedback discharge. One of our scientists was in the beam path when it malfunctioned." She paused. "He wasn't himself afterward. He was inhabited. Something came through the same beam in the other direction." The silence in the room changed quality. "You are saying," Vressa said, very slowly, "that something came through the transit beam when it was aimed at your station." "I'm saying I don't know what came through, but I know it wasn't staying in Dr. Jennings. It was using him." She met Vressa's amber eyes steadily. "Whoever activated that beam on your end was standing right next to it." The silence held for 3 full seconds. Then Vressa stood. Not quickly. The Volkai didn't move quickly without reason. It was a cultural thing. Speed was something you reserved for when it mattered, but with a weight and purpose that told Kale she'd said something significant. "Come," Vressa said. "Where?" "To the pack." The pack was not a metaphor. The Volkai organized themselves in combat units called packs, and the pack structure was the foundation of everything: social standing, resource access, political power. Gareth commanded the Apex Pack, the highest tier, and below him were 6 pack seconds and 18 pack thirds, and then everyone else arranged in descending rings like the ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Vressa's pack had 17 members. She introduced them to Kale with what Kale was learning to recognize as Volkai practicality. No ceremony, no context, just names and combat roles delivered like a briefing. There was Dren, the pack's youngest warrior, barely past his proving age, who had the endearing habit of staring at Kale with the focused intensity of someone trying to memorize a thing they might need to describe later. There was Sova, the pack's tactical lead, who did not stare at Kale at all but watched her constantly from the corners of her eyes, which was more unsettling. There was Old Tack, who had lost 2 fingers on his left hand in a battle Kale couldn't pronounce, and wore the lack as casually as a scar. And there was Commander Gareth, at the center of everything, who was wrong. She knew it immediately. She'd seen it before, not with aliens, but with humans who had been in the field too long, who had absorbed something they couldn't name and couldn't discharge, who moved through familiar spaces with an unfamiliar gait. The body language was right. The cadence was close, but something behind the eyes was miscalibrated. Gareth was tall even for the Volkai, 8 feet, with the kind of physical presence that made a room seem smaller without him doing anything deliberate to achieve this effect. He wore the marks of High Commander on his shoulder plates, the luminescent sigils that Kale had seen in intelligence photographs. He looked at her with Volkai amber eyes, and she looked back at him with human gray ones, and something in his expression registered her the way a scanner registers an anomaly. Noted, catalogued, not yet acted upon. "The human," Gareth said. His voice had the same resonance as Vressa's, but more of it, pitched in a register that Kale felt in her chest. "Delivered to us by accident." "So I've been told," Kale said. "And yet you survived the transit, unassisted, without preparation." He moved around her in a slow arc, the way something large and confident moves around something it hasn't decided how to categorize yet. "My analysts suggested a soft creature would not survive the compression. I'm harder than I look." He stopped. He was behind her. She did not turn around, because she had 3 years of training telling her that turning around was sometimes exactly what a predator wanted you to do, and 2 more years of experience telling her that training was usually right. "Humans," Gareth said from somewhere just past her right shoulder. "Your coalition sent 3 delegations to negotiate with us. All 3 failed. Your commanders believe you are beneath us, that you have nothing we want." A pause. Commander Velen in particular submitted a report 2 months ago stating that his reconnaissance specialist, another pause, deliberate, weighted, was a wasted resource, not worth the salary, expendable. Kale felt the words land. She had known about the report. She had been in the room when Velen had explained, calmly and with the particular cruelty of someone who knew exactly how little you could do about it, that her placement was under review, that the division was restructuring, that she should prepare to be reassigned to something else, something less, something befitting a specialist who had, in his estimation, never once done anything that couldn't have been done better by someone else. She hadn't argued. She'd gone back to her bunk and picked up the book her mother sent her and read until the words blurred, and then the white light had taken her, and here she was. "How do you know about that report?" she said. "We have excellent intelligence networks," Gareth said smoothly. He came back around to face her. The amber eyes were steady, too steady. The Volkai had tells, a slight dilation of the outer eye membrane when they were genuinely engaged, a very small flicker at the jaw ridge when they were suppressing emotion. Gareth had neither. His face was still in a way that didn't quite match the conversation. "Stay," he said. "You have nothing to return to." It wasn't wrong. She knew it wasn't wrong. Velen's report had made that clear enough. "I'll think about it," she said. She thought about it in the way she thought about most things, by doing something with her hands. On the 6th day, she found the training grounds. The Volkai had them on the lower platform of the North Tower. Open air, enormous, the amber sky very close overhead, the wind off the high altitude sharp and mineral. She arrived at dawn, which on Veth was a gradient from deep red to the brighter amber of full daylight, and found it occupied by 12 warriors running a combat drill she'd never seen before but could read well enough. Contact work, close range, designed to test reaction time and pain tolerance in equal measure. She watched from the edge for almost an hour, then Dren noticed her. He broke off from the drill and came over with the focused look. She was starting to associate with him specifically. He was the youngest, but he was not small, 6.5 feet, broad through the shoulders, with the particular kind of physicality that suggested he'd been built for this from the beginning. He had been paying attention to her since she arrived in the way that young warriors in every species paid attention to things they didn't understand and hadn't filed yet. "You're watching the form," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm watching your footwork," she said. "It's good, but you're loading your weight left before you strike right. Your opponents will see it if they're patient." He blinked. The outer membrane flickered, surprised. She was starting to learn was what that meant. "You read the form." "Combat's combat," she said. "The physics doesn't change." He studied her the way she'd been studied since she arrived, except with less calculation and more something she recognized across species, the specific interest of someone who hadn't encountered a thing before and was trying to figure out if they liked it. "Can you demonstrate?" She could, so she did. What followed was not a fight. It was something more like a conversation. Kale was 100 pounds lighter than Dren and nearly 2 feet shorter, and possessed of none of the Volkai's natural advantages: the denser muscle structure, the longer reach, the ridge-reinforced joints that turned what would be an injury in a human into a minor inconvenience for them. What she had was 16 years of making do with what she had. She had the particular economy of motion that comes from someone who learned early that burning energy on looking impressive leaves you nothing for the moment when impressive stops mattering. She didn't win. She wasn't trying to win. But she made Dren work for every advantage, and twice she made him stop and reassess, which in its own way was more valuable. Sova watched the whole thing from across the training floor without approaching. When it was over, she was gone before Kale could speak to her. At dinner, communal, the whole pack at long tables in the deep room below the tower, Dren sat next to Kale for the first time. He ate with the efficiency of someone who treats food as fuel and told her, between bites, about the Juvek. "They are old," he said. "Older than the current pack structure. Before Gareth's ancestor consolidated the 12 clans, the Juvek were the primary philosophical power. They believed strength should be earned through wisdom, not through force, that the dominant pack should be the one that built the most, not destroyed the most." He paused. Gareth's line disagreed. "So there's been a civil conflict." "Ongoing, generational." He glanced sideways at her. "Gareth's goal is to end it, permanently. The weapon he was trying to pull through the transit beam was supposed to be the means." Kale turned this over. "The Juvek, do they have territory?" "The eastern reaches, 3 systems. They're not aggressive, but they're not yielding. He paused again, longer this time. Their commander is Kethrash. He is different from Gareth. He doesn't move the way Gareth moves lately. She noted that. She stored it. What do you mean lately? She said. Dren set down his utensil. He looked at the table for a moment. Gareth has changed in the last 40 days, since he first activated the transit beam. He looked up. Before, he would have eaten dinner with the pack. He would have run the morning drills. He would have told Sova directly when he disagreed with her tactical assessment. Now he paused, elsewhere, even when he is here. Kale said nothing. I am not the only one who sees it, Dren said quietly. But no one speaks it, because he is High Commander and because we do not have the words for what has changed. She looked at him. He was young, and he was paying attention to the right things, and that was rarer than it should have been at any age in any species. I have words for it, she said. She found Vressa late that night, on the high bridge between the north and central towers where the wind was loudest and the amber nightscape of Veth spread out below them like spilled fire. Vressa was looking at the horizon. Kale came to stand beside her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to see the Volkai woman's face. He's been possessed, Kale said without preamble. The same entity that came through the beam when it malfunctioned on our end. Whatever it was, it jumped. Or it divided. I don't know how it works, but I know the signs. Vressa didn't look at her. The wind moved between them. You have seen this before, Vressa said, in your own people. A colleague, Dr. Jennings. She paused. He lasted 11 days before we found a way to force it out, but by then it had already learned to use the dimensional equipment. It was opening the beam for others of its kind. Vressa's jaw ridge flickered. There are more of them. There are always more of them. That's the only thing they reliably are numerous. She let a beat pass. The weapon Gareth was trying to pull through the beam. Where is it now? In the central lab, the secure level. Vressa finally turned to look at her. Gareth has been spending a great deal of time there, alone. He's not alone down there, Kale said. The silence held for a long time. The city of Veth spread below them, its towers lit from within, the bridges between them traced in faint bioluminescence. It was, objectively, one of the most beautiful things Kale had ever seen. She filed this away next to the other beautiful things she'd seen in places that were trying to kill her. The Duvak, she said, you trust them. Vressa's head turned sharply. That is not a simple question. I know, I'm asking it anyway. Another long pause. Kethrash was my pack mentor, Vressa said finally, before the schism deepened, when I was still young enough to train across faction lines. She looked back at the horizon. He is not what the current doctrine says he is. Could you reach him? It would be, she stopped, started again. It would be viewed as treason. By Gareth, Kale said, or by the thing wearing Gareth's face. The jaw ridge flickered twice. They went at first light. Not the whole pack, 6 of them, moving in the way that Volkai moved when they didn't want to be seen. Low and quiet, and in the intervals between sentry patterns that Sova had memorized, because Sova memorized everything and had been quietly preparing for exactly this kind of operation since the 3rd day she'd noticed her commander's eyes were wrong. Kale ran with them. She was shorter and slower, and they adjusted without comment, the pack redistributing its spacing to account for her stride, the way a hand adjusts its grip on a new tool without being told. They took a transit shuttle, not the dimensional beam, a standard in-atmosphere craft, and they flew low over the eastern reaches as the amber dawn brightened, and Kale watched the landscape below shift from the dense vertical architecture of the Volkai settlements to something older and more horizontal. The Juvek built differently, wider, lower, structures that spread across the terrain rather than asserting themselves above it. It looked, in the early light, less like a stronghold and more like a place where someone intended to stay. Kethrash met them on the landing platform. He was older than Garath, his graphite skin faintly lightened at the temples, the markings on his shoulder plates worn with the particular patina of something that had been earned and then carried for a long time. He looked at the shuttle and then at Vressa, and something in his face, that slight dilation, the outer membrane widening, moved through the specific register Kale was learning to read as grief. "You wouldn't come here unless it was already bad," he said. "It is already bad," Vressa said. He looked at Kale. It was the first time she'd been in the presence of a Volkai who looked at her and seemed to see her without recategorizing her. His amber eyes were very still, but not in the way Garath's were still. His was the stillness of something that had been asked a lot of questions, and had learned to hold them all at once without losing any of them. "You came through the transit beam," he said. "Yes." "And you survived." He said it the way Vressa had, but with something different underneath, not amusement and not contempt, something more like attention. "Our analysts said a human could not survive the compression." "Your analysts keep saying that," Kale said. "We keep surviving things anyway, it's sort of our thing." The corner of his mouth, the Volkai analog of one, the slight extension of the lower jaw ridge, moved. It was not quite a smile. It was the shape a smile would make if it had been carved by someone who had only been described one. "Come inside," he said. Inside, with tea that was not tea but served the same social function, Kale told Kethrash everything she knew about the entity that had possessed Dr. Jennings. She told it plainly, without editorializing, and he listened the way good commanders listen, taking it in without interrupting, turning it, placing it against what he already knew. When she finished, he sat with it for a moment. "The Void Walkers," he said. "We have records of them, very old records." He looked at Vressa. "The kind of records your High Commander has spent 2 decades attempting to classify." Vressa's jaw ridge flickered. He knew. He has always known they exist. He believed they were not a threat because they require a host to function, and he believed he was too strong to be taken. Kethrash set down his cup. He was wrong about what strong means to something that has been walking between dimensions since before our civilization existed. "What do they want?" Kale said. "What any organism wants," he said. "To expand, to continue, to bring more of themselves into spaces that can sustain them." He looked at her directly. "Your dimensional technology was not something they expected. We created a door and then stood next to it and they walked through." "So the weapon in the central lab," Kale said. If the thing inside Garath, uses it to open the beam at full power to the Void Walker dimension, it will not be 2 or 3 of them that come through." He said it with the evenness of something he had already made peace with. "We have estimated." "How many?" He told her. She sat with the number for a moment, doing the math against what she knew about Earth's defenses, coalition response times, the geography of vulnerability. "Right," she said, "so we're not letting that happen." Kethrash looked at her. "The device in the lab is the only thing capable of forcing the Void Walker out of a host. The same weapon can destroy the beam itself." He paused. "But it requires direct contact. Someone has to be in the room." "Someone has to get into the lab," Vressa said. "Past Garath's security," Kale said, "which is currently being run by the Void Walker who has had 40 days to optimize it." She thought for a moment. "What does it not understand?" "Your kind," Kethrash said. "Void Walkers model their host's knowledge base, but they take time. The Void Walker in Garath has modeled everything Garath knew about his own people. It does not know humans. It has not had sufficient exposure." He looked at her steadily. "You would be unpredictable to it." "Unpredictable," Dren said from across the room, with a tone that suggested he had heard this word applied to Kale before and had been waiting for someone else to arrive at it. "That's been said about me before," Kale said. "Usually not as a compliment." "Today," Kethrash said, "it is one." They planned through the afternoon, and into the deep amber evening, with Kethrash's tactical people and Sova's memorized sentry patterns and Dren's ground-level knowledge of the central tower's layout. And Kale sat in the middle of all of it and said very little because she was listening and thinking and building the shape of a thing in her head that felt, if not certain, at least possible. The Volcae, she had learned over 9 days, were exceptional at direct engagement. They were built for it, psychologically as much as physically. What they were less good at was the kind of operation that required someone to be underestimated, to seem like nothing, to walk through the middle of a situation, without triggering the instinct in the people around them to treat them as a threat. Kale had spent her entire career being underestimated. Commander Velen had written it into her official record. She had spent years being irritated by this fact. She had recently started to find it useful. "I go in first," she said, during a lull in the planning. "Alone. I walk in as if I'm going to meet with the High Commander, because I've been here 10 days and I haven't formally addressed him since the first day, and that's a gap he'll want to close." Vressa looked at her. "If the Void Walker reads you as a threat." "It won't," Kale said, "not immediately. Because it will look at me and see what everyone sees. One human, small, soft, no pack, no standing, dismissed by her own commander as expendable." She kept her voice level. "It will underestimate me, and I will spend every second of that window doing what I need to do." The silence in the room was the kind of silence that happens when a group of people look at a plan and recognize that it is not safe and not certain, and also that it is the right one. "Then we are behind you," Kethrash said. 12 seconds after you enter, no more." 12 seconds, she said. "I just need 12 seconds." She thought of Dr. Jennings, who had lasted 11 days in the beam's shadow and had still found enough of himself in the end to tell them how to force it out. She thought of her bunk on Helix Station, and the book with the note tucked inside, and the small green light of the station's exterior grid visible through her porthole at night. The light she had fallen asleep watching so many times she had stopped seeing it, the way you stop seeing the things that are simply there. She thought of Velen's voice, careful and dismissive, saying expendable. She thought, "We'll see." They went back at nightfall. The central tower of the Volcae capital was the tallest structure on Veth, a needle of stone and grown material that caught the amber sunset and turned it red on the way up, and something close to gold at the very top. The lab was 4 levels below the High Commander's chambers, which were at the summit, and this arrangement had always struck Kale as revealing. Gareth liked to be above the things he was building. He liked to see them in context. He liked to see everything in context. The Void Walker inside him had kept this preference, had not changed it, because it was not yet fluent in Gareth, only competent, and it was defaulting to the patterns it had absorbed rather than interrogating whether those patterns were useful. This was the thing Kale had noticed, the thing she'd been turning over for 2 days. A parasite that inhabits a host inherits the host's habits, and habits are the scaffolding of vulnerability. The Void Walker would not be looking down. It would be looking out. She walked through the main entrance at the 22nd hour, which was not an unusual hour for Volcae activity, because the Volcae did not have the same circadian relationship with darkness that humans did. The sentry at the entrance registered her neural signature. She'd been given a temporary pass on day 2, a concession to the practical reality that keeping her locked in a room was less interesting than letting her be observed, and let her through. She took the lift to the lab level. She knocked. The Volcae had a convention around closed doors that paralleled the human one closely enough that the gesture was readable. The door opened. Gareth was inside. He stood at the central console, a wide, dark surface covered in instruments she partially recognized and partially didn't, and the lab behind him was exactly as the briefing documents had described it. High ceiling, secure walls, the dimensional beam array in the far corner, and the weapon on the table by the north wall, long and dark and built for a hand larger than hers. "Staff Sergeant," Gareth said. His voice was the same resonant depth it always was. The amber eyes were the same flat stillness. "I had wondered when you would come to speak with me properly." "I've been getting my bearings," Kale said. She stepped inside. She kept her hands loose at her sides. She was looking at the weapon on the table and calculating distance, and she was also looking at him and calculating something else. "I wanted to understand the situation before I asked for anything." "And what do you want to ask for?" "Safe passage," she said, "back to Coalition space, a shuttle and coordinates." She let a beat pass. "I've thought about your offer. I don't think staying is right for me." The flat amber eyes moved across her. She watched the jaw ridge. Nothing. "You want to leave," Gareth said. "Commander Velen's report notwithstanding," she said. "I have things at home, a mother who sends me books, a record that needs rehabilitating." She smiled, and she let it be the kind of smile that her commanding officers had always read as trying too hard. "I'm not what you were hoping for, just a single expendable human who ended up somewhere she wasn't supposed to be." The Void Walker, inside Gareth, looked at her through Gareth's eyes. It did what a predator does when it looks at prey it has already categorized as manageable. It relaxed. It was, Kale had calculated, a fraction of a second. She moved. The table was 8 feet away, and she crossed it in 3 steps, her body already low, already committed, her hand closing around the weapon before she had fully registered closing the distance. It was heavier than she expected, calibrated for Volkai hands, and awkward, and she had exactly no training with it. But Tak had told her 3 nights ago, over dinner, when she had asked casually what would happen if this weapon were pointed at a living thing, that it required only 2 steps to operate. Flip the secondary panel up, press the forward contact. 2 steps. She flipped the panel. Gareth moved. Fast. The Void Walker did not have Gareth's hesitation, his social patterns, his learned performance of leadership in motion. It had his body at full capacity and no reason to hold back, and it covered the distance between them in a way that suggested it intended to take the weapon from her and remove her as a problem in the most efficient method available. She dropped. Not away down, under the arc of Gareth's reaching arm, below the line of his expected defense, her shoulder hitting the floor and rolling as the massive arm swept over her head with a sound like something moving through air very quickly. She came up already pointing the weapon. She pressed the forward contact. The discharge was white, not the white of the transit beam. This was colder, more focused, like a concentrated column of winter. It struck Gareth in the center mass and he staggered, and then the voice that came out of him was not Gareth's voice at all. It was something older, something that had no origin in any larynx she could identify, a sound like radio frequency interference scaled up to the volume of thunder. The door opened behind her, 12 seconds exactly. Vressa came through first, then Dren, then Sova, then Kethvrash, then the others, spreading into the room with the practiced coherence of a pack that has been running together long enough to stop requiring instruction. Gareth, the thing inside Gareth, turned toward them. It was shedding the performance now, the social mimicry it had been maintaining. The amber eyes had changed, the pupil-less surface now faintly luminescent, lit from somewhere behind. The jaw moved in the wrong direction. The voice kept going, that radio thunder frequency, and the instruments on the central console began to shake. "It's opening the beam," Kale said. "It's calling more of them." Kethvrash crossed the room in 3 strides, reaching the beam array console before anyone had time to suggest it was dangerous. He had been building something like this moment in his head for 20 years. She realized, ever since he'd first seen those old records, ever since he'd understood what the Void Walkers were, and what they wanted, and what Gareth's line had been willing to risk to avoid acknowledging it. He began the shutdown sequence. The thing inside Gareth screamed. It was not a sound she would be able to adequately describe afterward when people asked. She tried several times. What she eventually settled on was, imagine a frequency that the human ear was never designed to receive, and then imagine receiving it anyway. That was close. That was the neighborhood. Gareth moved toward Kethrash. Kale fired again. The second discharge was longer. She held the contact down and walked toward him, forcing the beam to track, and the column of white cold struck him continuously, and the Voidwalker inside him convulsed, and the room vibrated, and something at the far end of the beam array cracked, and then the light changed. The Voidwalker came out. This is not a simple thing to describe either. It did not come out the way a person exits a room. It came out the way an infection becomes visible, suddenly present in a way it was not before, manifested as something that resisted simple category. It was dark where the room was lit. It was cold where the air was warm. It had a shape in the way that shadows have a shape, defined by what it was adjacent to rather than by any property of its own. It looked at Kale. She held the weapon on it and kept walking. The thing about being expendable, Kale had thought about this a great deal over the years. The thing about being the person in the room who everyone has already written off, who already exists in the assessments and reports as a loss that will not be particularly mourned, is that you have nothing left to protect. You have already been given up on. You have already been closed as an account. And this means, paradoxically, that you are free. Free to walk directly at something that every calculation says is dangerous. Free to press a forward contact and hold it down. Free to find out what happens when the most powerful thing in the room decides you're not worth watching. What happens is, you win. The Voidwalker's shape collapsed. Not explosively, there was no spectacle to it, no final cry of operatic proportion. It simply became less coherent. The dark of it diffused. The cold lifted. The vibration in the room settled, and the instrument stopped shaking, and the beam array went quiet as Kethrash's shutdown sequence completed. Gareth crumpled to the floor. Vressa was beside him before he landed, which told Kale everything she needed to know about the relationship between a pack third and the high commander she had served for 15 years, whatever else might have happened between them. He was breathing. Kale checked this first. He was breathing and his eyes were closed and the luminescence was gone from behind them, and his jaw moved in the right direction and his voice, when it came, was cracked and exhausted and completely, unmistakably his own. "Vressa," he said. "I am here," Vressa said. Kale set the weapon down on the nearest surface and straightened up and took a long, slow breath. The amber light of Veth came through the high lab windows, unchanged. Outside, the city of towers stood in its own deep quiet, bridges lit. The nightscape spread below like an argument for the persistence of beautiful things. Dren appeared beside her. He looked at the weapon, he looked at her. He made the sound she had started to associate with him specifically. A short exhale, the Voakai version of a laugh. The one that meant he had just seen something he didn't have language for yet but intended to acquire. "2 steps," he said. "You were told there were 2 steps to operate it." "Tak told me," she said, 3 nights ago over dinner." "And you asked him casually." "I asked him casually." He looked at her for a long time with the focused intensity of someone memorizing a thing. "You were planning this already." "I was preparing options," she said. "That's different." It wasn't really different, but it was the kind of thing you said, and he knew it, and the jaw ridge did the almost smile thing. The aftermath was not simple. Gareth spent 6 days recovering, during which the pack ran itself. Not unusual, Vressa told her, in the cases of injury or incapacitation. The pack structure was designed to function in the absence of its commander. What was unusual was the presence of Kethrash in the central tower, his people working alongside Vressa's. The schism that had calcified over 3 generations suddenly revealed to be a scar rather than a wound painful to touch but no longer infected. Kale spent those 6 days writing. She borrowed a datapad from Dren and drafted a report she did not have anyone to send it to, because Helix Station was not accessible from Veth by any communication method she could jury-rig, and Commander Velen was several light years and a dimensional transit away, and the report would have to wait. But she wrote it, because this was what she did with the things that mattered. She put them in order. She made them legible. She handed them to the future and trusted the future to know what to do. On the 7th day, Gareth asked to speak with her. He was in his upper chambers, the summit of the central tower, with the view of the city that he had apparently always preferred, and that the Voidwalker had continued to prefer, which felt like an irony of some kind. He was seated, which was not characteristic for him but understandable given the condition. Vressa stood behind him. Keth Vrash was in the room, off to the side, the two of them in proximity that would have been impossible 40 days ago. Gareth looked at Kale. His eyes were clear. The stillness was back, but the right kind of stillness, inhabited, not hollow. "I am told you used the disintegrator," he said. "Twice," she said. "I am told you walked directly at the Voidwalker." "It wasn't expecting that," she said. A long pause. "I am told that before you left Helix Station, your commanding officer designated you a wasted resource in an official report." "He did." Gareth was quiet for a moment. The amber eyes moved across her with a different quality than they had on the first day, not cataloging, not categorizing. Something else. Something that didn't have a direct translation in the limited Voakai vocabulary she'd acquired, but that her neural chip rendered, tentatively, as either acknowledgement or the specific kind of recognition that precedes an apology from someone who does not make apologies lightly. "He was wrong," Gareth said. She let the words land. "Yeah," she said, "he was." Another pause. Then, "The transit beam, the spectroscope on your station that created the original aperture, if it were available, we could theoretically re-establish the connection. Return you to Coalition space." "Would you?" she said, not challenging, genuinely curious. "That is the question," he said. "Between your Coalition and us there is a great deal to discuss. The Voidwalkers are not finished. What came through your station was an advanced presence testing the aperture, testing the host, testing the defenses on both sides." He looked at her steadily. "We need a liaison, someone who understands both species, someone already present." He paused. "I am not keeping you, I am asking." She thought about Helix Station, the green exterior lights, the book with the note, the report with her name on it that said expendable. She thought about Velen's voice, and the 16 years before Velen, and the things she had seen and done in those years that had not made it into any report because no one thought to ask her. She thought about Dren on the training floor, loading his weight left before striking right, and Vressa on the high bridge with the wind between them, and Tak eating dinner with 2 fewer fingers, and not once mentioning that it slowed him down. She thought about the Voidwalker looking at her, and deciding she wasn't worth watching. She thought about what it was to be the person everyone has already underestimated, and about the very specific freedom that lives in that particular kind of invisibility, and about what a person can do with freedom when they know how to use it. "I'll need the rest of my things from Helix Station," she said, "including the book." Gareth's jaw ridge did something she hadn't seen it do before. Something slow and deliberate that her neural chip rendered, after a longer than usual processing pause, as genuine warmth. "Done," he said. She was on the high bridge the next evening when Dren found her. He brought 2 cups of the not tea and stood beside her in the way he had started to stand beside her, with the easy assumption that his presence was acceptable, that she found, against her expectations, to be correct. They looked out at the city. The amber dusk was moving through its gradient, the towers shifting from gold to red to the deep violet of nightfall. Below them, Keth Vrash's people were still moving through the central tower, and Gareth's pack was still adjusting to the new shape of things. And somewhere in the lower city, A group of Volkai warriors was running a training drill that Kale had helped design over the last 3 days, weighted footwork corrected. The new pattern strange and uncomfortable in the way that all new patterns were strange and uncomfortable before they became ordinary. "You're staying," Dren said, "not a question." "For now," she said, "probably longer than that, but for now." He turned his cup in his four-fingered hands. "Because there is work to do here." "Because there is work to do here," she agreed. He nodded once with the gravity of someone who had grown up in a culture where consent to a statement carried weight, who understood that nodding was not a small gesture, that it was a specific kind of alignment. "Then we will run drills tomorrow at dawn." "Wait on the right," she said. "Wait on the right," he agreed. Below them, the city breathed. The bridges between towers glowed with their faint bioluminescence, tracing the connections between high places the way connections always are traced, not as a record of the past, but as a guide for everything still to come. Kale leaned on the railing and looked at the horizon and let herself, for the first time in a long time, not be thinking about what came next. For now this. The amber night, the wind. The particular quality of silence that falls when a very large and very old thing has been faced and held and forced, however briefly, to step back. She had been told she was expendable. She had been told she was not worth the cost of keeping. She had been told, in the careful administrative language that is always a little worse than outright contempt, that she was nothing that couldn't be replaced with something better. She was very far from home. She had lost her way back twice and found it again twice, and she was starting to suspect that the way back was not the only direction worth knowing. She drank the not tea. It was bitter and warm, and she had been drinking it for 11 days, and she was starting to like it. That was enough. 3 weeks later, Helix Station received a transmission. It came through a frequency that did not exist in the Coalition's registered communication bands. A frequency that the station's automated systems flagged as anomalous and would have deleted, if Commander Velen had not happened to be standing at the monitoring console when it arrived, reviewing a resource allocation report, and had not happened to glance at the alert before his finger reached the dismiss function. He read the header, he read it again. Then he sat down, which was not something he was in the habit of doing while standing at the monitoring console. The transmission was from Staff Sergeant Cale Marin, 2nd Recon Division, formerly assigned to Helix Station. Status: missing since the transit beam incident of 43 days prior, presumed lost with no recovery recommended in the official incident report that Velen himself had signed. It was 12 minutes long. It was audio and text, and a set of attached data files that the system estimated would take 4 hours to fully decompress. The audio opened with her voice, level, professional, with that particular quality she had of delivering information as though she expected you to argue with it, and had already decided how to handle your objections. "This is Staff Sergeant Cale Marin, reporting from Veth, Primary Settlement, Volkai Homeworld, Keth Expanse. I am alive and operational. I have established first contact with the Volkai High Command and with the Duvak faction leadership, whose cooperation I was able to secure in connection with a joint threat response. The Voidwalker entity has been neutralized. The dimensional aperture has been secured pending Coalition Volkai technical consultation. I am transmitting full documentation. The Voidwalker behavioral profile, the disintegrator specifications, the diplomatic groundwork of the current Coalition Volkai Duvak tri-party arrangement, and my formal request for liaison status, which High Commander Gareth has co-signed. I'm aware that my last status in the record is as a wasted resource. I would like to request that this notation be reviewed. Additionally, I will need someone to forward my personal effects from Helix Station, specifically the book in my bunk. My mother sent it and I haven't finished it. Marin out. Velen sat with this for a long time. Outside the station's viewport, The stars were the same stars they had always been, indifferent, precise, uncountably numerous, each of them the center of some system he would never visit, holding planets he would never stand on, watching species he would never meet. He had spent 22 years in this service, and he had never walked into a room where no one expected him to win and won anyway. He thought of the report he had written, the careful language, the administrative courtesy of it, which was always worse than contempt. He thought, I was wrong. He had not been trained to think this easily. It took him some time. Then he picked up the datapad and began the process of revising the record. The book arrived 3 months later. It came in a diplomatic transfer case, the first official coalition cargo delivery to Veth, a small milestone that generated a great deal of protocol documentation on both ends, and that Dren, who had been assigned to coordinate the logistics, found deeply tedious and told Kale so in considerable detail. The case also contained a second book. She didn't recognize the title. There was a note tucked inside in her mother's handwriting that said, I figured you'd finish the first one by now. This one is better anyway. Also, they tell me you're doing something important out there. I always knew you would. Come home when you can. She read the note twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the same place she always put her mother's notes, which was the front pocket of her jacket, where she could feel it when she moved. She was standing on the high bridge when she read it. The amber afternoon light came at the long angle of late day, catching the towers and turning the bioluminescent bridge traces faint in the brightness. Below her, the city moved with its usual purposeful weight. Volkai and Juvek both now, the integration still new and still occasionally awkward. The way all true peace is awkward in its early stages, because peace requires renegotiating things that conflict had settled by force, and force is, whatever else it is, efficient. Vressa came to stand beside her. She had been doing this more often now, coming to stand in the places where Kale was standing, without announcement, the way people begin to do when they have established that their company is acceptable and have decided to stop making an event of it. The delivery was successful, Vressa said. I saw. Kale held up the new book. Vressa looked at it. She had asked Kale 2 weeks ago to explain what a book was, not the concept of stored information, which the Volkai had in many forms, but the specific human thing of a physical object containing the compressed experience of another consciousness, passed from hand to hand, carrying the margin notes and foxed pages and small evidence of everyone who had held it before. She had listened with the full Volkai attention that Kale was still getting used to. The way they listened to things they considered genuinely important, without performance, without the social signals that humans use to signal active listening, just the absolute complete stillness of something that is receiving information it intends to keep. She had not said what she thought about it, but she had asked, 3 days later, whether Kale would translate one for her when the liaison's official translation work allowed. She had said it casually. She had said it in the tone of someone who has thought about something for several days and has decided to act on it and is trying not to make the action seem as significant as it is. Kale had said yes. Dren has redesigned the training schedule, Vressa said now. He incorporated the footwork corrections. He did not tell the others they came from you. Did it work? Sova's reaction time on the left side strike improved by a 1/6. She does not know why. A pause. She suspects Dren. Kale turned this over. Should we tell her? Eventually, Vressa said. When she asks, Sova only accepts information she has earned the question for. This was a deeply Volkai way of thinking about things, and Kale was beginning to find it, after 3 months, less alien and more simply different, which was the movement she had learned between encountering a thing and understanding it. You started with alien. You ended, if you were paying attention, with different. And different was not a distance. Different was a door. The Void Walker documentation I sent to the Coalition, Kale said. They'll have read it by now. They'll have questions. They will send someone, Vressa said. They will send someone, Kale agreed. And Gareth will have questions about the Coalition's response capability, and Kethvrash will want to discuss the philosophical implications of a species that walks between dimensions like we walk between rooms. She paused. It's going to be a great deal of talking. You are good at talking, Vressa said, when you choose to be. I'm better at not talking, Kale said. Talking I do when it's the more useful tool. The amber light deepened. Below them, a group of young Voakai warriors was running the new drill pattern. The one with the corrected footwork, the weight centered, the strike balanced. And the sound of it came up to the bridge as a series of impacts, rhythmic and purposeful, the sound of something being practiced until it became instinct. Kale watched them. She thought about instinct, about the things you did without thinking, the patterns that had formed over years until they were no longer decisions, but simply what you did when the time came. She thought about walking toward the Void Walker with the weapon in her hands and not being afraid, or being afraid and moving anyway, and how there was no fundamental difference between those two states when the action was the same. She thought about Velen's voice. She thought, I am very far from where he decided I should be, and I am fine. More than fine. She opened the new book. The spine cracked, that specific sound of a first opening, the sound of something beginning. She read the first line. She read it again. She decided she was going to like it. 1 hour, she said to Vressa. Then I have the briefing with Gareth and Kethvrash. 1 hour, Vressa agreed, and did not move and did not need to. The wind came up from below, carrying with it the ambient sound of the city, the impact of the training drill, the lower register of machinery, the occasional voice calling across a distance in the Voakai tongue that her neural chip rendered so smoothly now, she sometimes forgot it was translating. She had been told, by a linguist at the Coalition 3 months ago and 8 light-years away, that the human brain never truly became fluent in a non-human language, that there were structures the neural architecture couldn't accommodate, shapes of meaning that wouldn't map. That translation was always approximate. She had filed this under things that were probably true and also beside the point. The point was the hour, the wind, the new book beginning, the city below learning how to be something it hadn't been before, something broader, something that included the presence of one human woman on a high bridge, holding a paperback her mother sent, watching young warriors practice a footwork correction that came from 16 years of making do. Somewhere in the lower city, a training voice called out a correction. The pattern adjusted. The sound changed. Better. Kale turned the page.